I remember the exact moment when I became aware of how completely my attention left myself whenever I was around others. It was about a year out of college. I'd been hanging out with two friends for a few hours. And I remember in the middle of our conversation, I let out this long, audible sigh. And I was totally caught off guard with this. I had no idea where this sigh had come from, and I just stopped kind of mid sentence. And I was trying to figure it out. And this is when I realized that this is the first time I had paid any attention to how I was feeling or what was happening in my body that entire conversation. And up until then, I had been completely absorbed in basically tracking and monitoring how my friends were feeling. I was picking up on all these little cues, facial expression, body language, tone of voice, trying to make sure they were having a good time, feeling out for any displeasure or disapproval. And then this moment of me sighing and letting out this noise that it felt like came from nowhere brought me back into my own body all at once. And I remember feeling all these different little physical sensations. There was the texture of the chair on my skin, and my hands felt restless. My heart was beating across my chest. But really, more than anything, I just remember how it felt to breathe. And I remember just by noticing my breath that it slowed down and that it felt really good to breathe and to be aware of this. It was this feeling almost like coming home, coming back into my own body. There was this reassurance, this comforting. I remember feeling rejuvenated. Every single breath felt like this gift and this revelation. And so I was having this whole moment, and my friends had no idea that anything had changed within me. Our conversation had just kept going on, and it was just funny for me because I felt like I had slipped unnoticed into this whole different experience of reality. And this was a reality that me and my feelings were finally included in. And so once I started to notice this pattern of how my attention left myself and my body when I was around others, I couldn't unsee this. And I saw how it was actually happening all of the time. Pretty much whenever I was around other people, in conversations with strangers and friends, but also in crowds, walking down the street, at the store. All it really took was having another person within eyesight or earshot, and my attention immediately left me and went to picking up on any minor shift in how that person was feeling and doing and thinking. And more than just noticing how the people around me felt, I was feeling their emotions along with them. Because I had little to no awareness of my own body and emotions. I was just absorbing the feelings of everyone around me into my own body and just feeling them as if they were my own. At first, when I realized this was happening, I called this empathy, and I took a lot of pride in being an empath. And yes, it's true, my constant hypervigilance and hypersensitivity to other people's emotions came with a lot of skills and a lot of emotional intelligence. But all of this was coming from a place of me having basically no emotional boundaries. One of my friends calls this emotional sponging. And over time, I was coming to see how I was doing this emotional sponging all of the time. And this wasn't something that I was choosing, but more of an unconscious reflex, and it felt automatic and compulsive. And not only was I not choosing to do this, but I was starting to see how much energy this was costing me, how much energy being around other people in any form cost me. I also saw the cost on my relationships because me and my feelings weren't a part of my relationships. So a lot of my relationships lacked a certain level of depth and intimacy. And even more than that, I started to really see and feel how It felt like my entire worth was conditional and dependent on me helping other people, being of service, giving back. I felt like I had to give back to other people to justify my own right to exist. And my conditioning around enmeshment, if I'm being honest, is a big part of why I was first drawn to even working in mental health. Devoting my life to helping others was another way that I was unconsciously trying to justify that I deserved to exist. Even when I became aware of all of this, I had no idea what to do about it at first. The way that I felt on a daily basis felt completely conditional and dependent on what other people thought of me. And everything changed based on whatever external feedback or validation I had gotten that day or week. My mood, what I was thinking about, my anxiety levels, my confidence, how I saw myself in the mirror, how I felt in my body. I felt like a prisoner to other people's opinions of me. And as much as I wanted to stop caring what other people thought about me, this felt impossible. I saw no way out. It really just felt like a nice idea. But what finally freed me from this mental and emotional cage was having my heart completely broken. And I don't say this to imply that everyone's process of healing from enmeshment requires heartbreak. We really do each have our own path of healing. And so even the way that I'm describing and that I experience enmeshment may not be the way that you yourself experience it. People react a lot of different ways to growing up conditioned to enmesh, and you really see people fall on either end of the anxious or avoidant spectrum. Both anxious and avoidant attachment styles typically come back to a root of being conditioned to enmesh. So the only reason I'm sharing my story here is just to offer some hope and solidarity for those of you who may also be starting off your healing journey from a place of heartbreak. And if that doesn't resonate, take whatever you feel like clicks with you from my story and leave the rest. So at the time that I had my heart broken, along with it, my trust had been completely broken into pieces. I felt so alone and unseen and misunderstood and disillusioned and bitter. And I think for me, it did take hitting this sort of rock bottom to finally see that I couldn't keep going on like this and that something fundamental in my relationships needed to change. Even as I was thinking this, though, I had no idea, and I could never have imagined the gifts that would come from sifting through all of this pain. It just started with trying to heal from my heartbreak. And my heartbreak, this was actually a friendship breakup. This was a really dear friend to me, my closest friend at that time. And so the first thing I had to face when I was going through my process of trying to heal was accepting that this person who I loved really more than anyone had no idea who I actually was and had fundamentally misunderstood, misjudged, and blamed me for everything that had gone wrong between us. And the truth is that I wasn't blameless. I violated a lot of their autonomy and their preferences and sense of self through trying to fuse with them. And I'd been unconsciously trying to erase or ignore all of our fundamental incompatibilities for the sake of staying close friends and staying together. So even as I was taking this responsibility for my part in our friendship coming apart, I could see that the way my friend had come to judge me, a lot of it just wasn't right. So many of the things that they thought I'd said, felt, or done, I hadn't. And I really felt like the person that my friend had come to resent and hold this deep anger at wasn't actually me. And more than anything, it was a projection of a lot of their own unhealed pain, things that they weren't willing to face within themselves. And once I realized this, I did stop caring as much what people thought of me, but not out of any place of liberation or empowerment, more from this place of nihilism and everything feeling meaningless and not trusting anyone. I was seeing how everyone, it felt like, was living in these self-constructed and totally self-absorbed worlds of their own beliefs, biases, and feelings. And I saw how few people could see themselves clearly enough to be able to really see any of the people around them. And feeling so alone and misunderstood is what pushed me to more earnestly try to understand myself. I felt like I had no other choice because I realized no one else is going to do this for me. So I started just by sifting through what parts of my friendship ending felt like my responsibility and what parts weren't actually about me. And this is how I first began to develop and strengthen my discernment, how I learned to really own what is my responsibility and to let go of what isn't. And that being said, I still get lost and struggle sometimes with discerning appropriate responsibility. But it's become a lot easier over time, and whenever I get stuck trying to sift through how much of someone else's feelings are actually about me, I come back to two guiding questions. Number one, does the way this person sees me feel true and consistent with how I know myself? By now, I know myself very well, and I've done a lot of work to understand myself, so that question is a lot easier to answer than it was at first. But that's where that second question comes in, which is, does this person see my needs as valid and recognize and respect my worth? If how the other person is perceiving me doesn't pass these two tests, that's how I can tell that their feelings are more about them than they are about me. And at first, practicing this discernment took a tremendous amount of conscious effort. It took countless repetitions. But every time I practiced asking myself these questions, and more importantly, trusting the answer, my discernment became stronger. And by now, I no longer have to reason and think my way formally through these questions. I can typically feel what is true for me in my gut. Through a lot of my own healing and therapy, I have come to experience my own worth so deeply and so viscerally that I can feel in my body what is coming from a place of fear and conditional self-worth versus what is real and authentic, both in myself and in others. And the more that I strengthened this muscle of discernment, the more I came to trust myself. But to trust myself, I had to let go of this false sense of safety that came from trying to fuse with another person or group, of going with what felt easy, known, comfortable, and more widely acceptable. And I remember at the beginning, coming to know and trust myself felt like walking blindly through this dark cave filled with murky water, and you're only guided by your feelings. And then there's these brief moments of clarity when I would experience true connection, joy, fulfillment, and I felt like, oh, I see and I can understand myself now. But as much as I hold on to those moments of inner clarity, I only arrive at them by walking into the dark, by accepting that there is so much more that I don't know about myself than that I know. And the same goes for you. Who you are is uncharted territory. No one has ever been down that path before. And that is scary, and it feels like there's a lot of risk and so many things we could do wrong or mess up. So a lot of us may just take this roadmap for life that society hands us, and we may just go through every single step that's dictated to us for what we need to do in order to be perceived as likable, successful, and valuable members of society. For me, at least, though, developing my own sense of worth and identity required accepting the ways that I am different from others and want more of different things. And by owning my differences, I finally gave myself the chance to live my insides on the outside, to create a life and an outer reality of my innermost feelings and desires. And living a life that represents who I am and what really matters to me is how I built a life that felt worth living. In developing my own sense of self, it wasn't the same as trying to build a fixed or static sense of my identity. I think that searching for more accurate words and labels to understand ourselves can be helpful when we are first getting to know ourselves, but for me, they ran the risk of just boxing me into another fixed identity. And attachment to labels also typically came from my old urge to enmesh again and to find safety through fusing with a larger group. And that group fusion for me was coming from a place of fear, and it felt very different than when I came to a place in my healing journey where what I was looking for was community. And community can serve as an incredible source of support and safety when we're healing from enmeshment. But the community that I have found and continue to build is a community that gives me space to grow, change, and express myself in very different ways from the rest of the group. So more than trying to find the right words or labels to understand myself, paying attention to how I feel in this moment is how I got to know myself. Because my feelings point to what I need and value in this moment. And over time, what I need and value changes, and I change along with it. And the only fixed thing that I think is true about me is my inherent worth and dignity. All of the boundaries that I build are in service of protecting this inherent worth and dignity. And I am not worthy because of what I do or what I have, but simply by virtue of being who I am. And when I could truly see my worth as inherent and unconditional in the exact same moment, I saw that this was true not just for me, but for everyone else. Because it was only when I was viewing my value as conditional that I was judging, ranking, and assigning other people conditional value based on the internal and arbitrary metric I'd been using to judge myself. Now, I believe when it comes to worth, there is no competition and there is no hierarchy. I am just as worthy as anyone else, and anyone else is just as worthy as me. And the biggest way that I honor my worth and the worth of all others is to live in alignment with it, to live and build a life that honors my worth and dignity. And I hope by changing how I see myself, that I can offer to all the people around me a new way of seeing themselves. I hope to offer this to my friends and the people in my personal life and to my clients. And that's a big part of why I am creating this channel and why I decided to share some of my own story in this video. Because I believe that the greatest thing that we can contribute to collective liberation is self-liberation. And starting by liberating ourselves from internalized oppression, from limiting fear-based beliefs, so that we can build a life that represents and honors our own unique expression of authenticity and self-empowerment. So that's what we're here for. In the next video, I will be sharing some of the main strategies that I've identified for healing from enmeshment. This comes from my own story and experience, and also a lot of writing, research, and work supporting my clients and healing from the same things. So really excited to share all of those with you. And thank you all for holding space and listening to some of my story for healing from enmeshment.